What would you do if you were the only human in a room the size of a city, and every alien there thought you were a complete joke? That was my life now, stuck in the Galactic Council chamber. It was a swirling pit where 73 different species floated around in their pods, all ranked by how tough they were. 1,000 different languages, clicks, growls, and whistles were all magically translated into English, but the meaning was always crystal clear. Humanity was the galaxy's biggest punchline. And smack in the middle of this cosmic roast was Ambassador Sarah Chen. She was wearing a simple gray suit, looking like a tourist who had wandered into the wrong dimension. From their floating thrones, the council members didn't even bother to hide their amusement. The translator in her ear just kept repeating one word over and over: laughter, as 1,000 pairs of alien eyes stared down at her. She had just delivered Earth's official declaration, and to these ancient, godlike beings, it was the most hilarious thing they'd heard in a century. "Okay, let's back up a second. I want to make sure I heard that right," chirped the speaker, a bird-like alien named Tom Von, his 3-part beak clicking with amusement. "Your species, who literally figured out how to fly between stars just 80 years ago, wants to declare a no-fly zone that's 50 light-years wide around your tiny little sun?" "That is the core of our announcement, yes," Chen replied. Her voice was so calm, so steady it was almost unnerving. There wasn't even a hint of the fear that should have been flooding her system. "And you seriously believe," Tom Von squawked, his tone dripping with disdain, "that every single race in this chamber is going to obey this little keep-out sign you've put up?" "We expect all vessels to honor the new boundary," Chen stated, her composure as solid as a brick wall. That one sentence threw the entire chamber into absolute chaos. The translation system went into overdrive, trying to keep up with a tidal wave of hoots, howls, and roars of pure disbelief. A couple of the warrior races looked at her like she'd just insulted their mothers, but Ambassador Chen just stood there, waiting patiently. She held the speaker's gaze, her hands clasped neatly behind her back, just letting the wave of ridicule crash over her. After what felt like an eternity, Tom Von flapped a wing to call for silence. The noise slowly died down, but you could still feel the contempt hanging heavy in the air. "Ambassador," he began, "your species has a grand total of 12 colonies. 12. The Zitharan Empire, sitting right next to me, controls 47 entire star systems. The Marine Collective has colonized 300 planets. The youngest species here, besides you, has been a spacefaring race for 600 years. By what authority do you make such an insane demand?" "It is not a demand," Chen corrected him gently. "It is an announcement." "That's just playing with words," a new voice boomed, a deep rumble that made the very floor vibrate. "So are you announcing this to us, or are you threatening us, little human?" Every head in the room swiveled toward the Zitharan pod. An image of High Commander Velkoth flickered to life, a massive, 4-armed giant covered in what looked like natural armor plating. The Zitharans were famous for wiping entire civilizations off the map, not for having polite chats. "We are threatening no one," Chen replied, turning to face his screen head-on. "We are simply establishing a border, and we are politely asking that you respect it." "Ask?" Velkoth's enormous mandibles cracked open into a chilling grin. "You are in no position to ask for anything," he growled. "You're standing in front of the most powerful beings in the known universe, telling us a huge chunk of space is now off-limits. And we're all just supposed to do what? Tip our hats and say, 'Yes, ma'am?'" "Yes," Chen said, and that single word cut through the chamber like a razor. The High Commander let out a laugh that sounded like 2 mountains grinding against each other. "And what if we refuse? Are your 12 little worlds going to declare war on the entire galaxy?" "We sincerely hope it doesn't come to that," she answered. "Hope." Velkoth seemed to get even bigger, filling the screen with his intimidating presence. "Let me tell you what I think of your hope, human. The Zitharan Empire has turned species with technology you can't even dream of into cosmic dust. We've taken apart fleets 10 times bigger than yours, and you have the nerve to tell us where we are allowed to travel?" Chen's calm, patient expression didn't waver for a second. "Commander Velkoth, I must strongly advise against—" "You will advise nothing!" His roar was so powerful, it literally shook the platform she was standing on. The primary trade route between our worlds and the outer systems cuts right through your little restricted area. We've been using that route for 3,000 years. Do you actually believe we're going to reroute our entire armada because a toddler species that still uses chemical rockets asked nicely? The route could be adjusted slightly, Chen suggested. It would add only about 6 days to your trip. A minor inconvenience when you consider the alternative. The alternative to what? Velkoth sneered. The one where the mighty Zitharan Empire is forced to take the scenic route around your pathetic little home? He spread all 4 of his massive arms wide. No, Ambassador, we will not be altering our course. In fact, I think it's high time someone taught humanity its proper place in this galaxy. A cold, heavy silence blanketed the chamber. Even the aliens who had been laughing just a minute ago were now stone-faced. This wasn't funny anymore. When a Zitharan High Commander talked about teaching lessons, it meant warships were already warming up their engines. Commander, Tom Von the speaker started, perhaps this can be handled with a bit more... This conversation is over, Velkoth snapped. In 3 of your Earth months, the Zitharan Trade Armada will proceed along its usual route directly through this so-called human space. If you humans have a problem with that, you are more than welcome to try and stop us. I suspect you'll learn a very valuable lesson about why newcomers should be seen and not heard. And with that, his screen went dark. His pod was black, but Chen was still standing there, like a statue in the eye of a storm. Whispers immediately broke out all around her. A few of the older, wiser species actually looked concerned by the Zitharan's threat. Others looked thrilled, like they had just gotten front-row tickets to a public execution. A few just stared at Chen with undisguised pity. Ambassador Chen, Tom Von said, all traces of humor gone from his voice. The Council has no jurisdiction over a sovereign empire. If the Zitharan fleet enters your space, we will not intervene. And just to be perfectly clear, any hostile action you take against them will be seen as an act of war. Earth will be entirely on its own. We understand the situation perfectly, Chen replied. Are you sure that you do? A soft ancient voice whispered from one of the highest pods. It was Ambassador Creel of the Vorten Collective, a being who had lived for thousands of years. Commander Velkoth does not make idle threats. That trade fleet will be escorted by at least 200 capital-class warships. And your entire military consists of, what, 40 ships? I've read the intelligence reports, your weapons are primitive, and your shields are like paper. 37 ships are combat-ready, Chen corrected her, her voice as level as a calm sea. Then you have to know this is suicide, Creel said, her tone softening, almost as if she were trying to be gentle. Withdraw your declaration, apologize to the Zitharans, offer them some kind of tribute. It is not too late to stop this. Chen just slowly shook her head. The declaration stands. Then your people are doomed, Creel stated matter-of-factly. You are like children playing with a plasma fire. I've watched empires far greater than yours burn to ash because of their pride. The Zitharans will show you no mercy. We are not asking for mercy. Then what are you asking for? Creel pressed, completely confused. No one picks a fight they know they can't possibly win unless they're trying to achieve something else entirely. For the very first time, something new flickered in Chen's expression. It was a cold, hard glint in her eyes that made a few of the ambassadors closest to her instinctively lean back. We want to be left alone, she said, her voice dropping to a low whisper that somehow echoed through the entire chamber. That is all we have ever wanted. We spent 10,000 years nearly wiping ourselves out. We finally got our act together, looked to the stars hoping for a peaceful future, and in just 80 years, we've been invaded twice. Our cargo ships have been raided 7 times, and 3 of our colonies have been shaken down by galactic thugs who see us as an easy target because we're the new kids on the block. Her voice never rose, but every single word hit like a punch to the gut. We are tired, she continued, tired of being the galaxy's punching bag, tired of being pushed around. We are done trying to convince you we come in peace. So we are drawing a line, a very clear one, and we are telling all of you in the most polite way we can, do not cross it. Or what? It was Velkoth. His pod had lit up again. He'd been listening the entire time. What will you do, little human? Your weapons are toys. Your shields are a joke. Your ships are pathetically slow. What could you possibly do to the mighty Zatharan Empire? Chen turned to face his pod one last time. We've told you what we want, Commander. We've shown you exactly where our line is. The choice to cross it is all yours. She took a deep breath, and her final words rang out in the dead silence. Just don't say we didn't warn you. With a short nod to Speaker Tomvan, she turned on her heel and walked away, the click of her shoes on the floor the only sound in that vast, stunned chamber. Pathetic, Velkoth hissed into the quiet. 3 months, human. We'll find out just how serious your little warning really is. And maybe, he sneered, after a quick tour of your so-called territory, your little species will finally learn some humility. Chen stood at the massive doorway, her back to them all. 3 months, she repeated, her voice a ghost. Then she was gone. For a solid minute, silence filled the room. Tomvan finally cleared his throat. Are there any other issues to— Hold on, Ambassador Creel interrupted him. She said they were telling us something. What was it? What's actually in that zone? But there was no one left to give an answer. What would you do if the biggest bully in the galaxy was about to flatten your home, and your only defense was a single, tiny ship with no weapons? That was the unbelievable corner humanity was backed into, and it all started because one alien ambassador tried to warn everyone. If you think that sounds intense, hit that subscribe button now so you don't miss what comes next. At a massive galactic council meeting, a chamber that was usually buzzing with noise, you could have heard a pin drop. Ambassador Yulin, from a race so ancient they saw everyone else's children, rose to his feet. He almost never spoke, so this was a huge deal. I wish to speak, his voice resonated through the hall. I have been studying the humans. It's a personal interest of mine, he explained, his gaze sweeping over the most feared warlords in the assembly. I have studied their entire history, their art, their ways of thinking. I have watched them grow. He let that sink in for a moment, and his next words hit like a ton of bricks. And I believe we should all move forward with extreme caution. A massive, arrogant commander named Velkoth actually laughed. Caution? About what? What's so special about these humans? Yulin paused, choosing his words carefully. Well, he started, they are a species that has spent 90% of its time on this planet, at war with itself. They built weapons powerful enough to shatter their own world and aimed them at each other. They cooked up plagues in laboratories that could have wiped out their entire species. They figured out how to poison their own air and boil their seas. And yet somehow, against all odds, they're still here. On dozens of occasions, they were standing on the very edge of wiping themselves out completely, Yulin went on. And every single time, something pulled them back from the brink. Velkoth grunted, losing his patience. Get to your point. My point, Commander, Yulin said, his voice suddenly cutting like a knife, is that for thousands of years, humans have perfected one thing above all else, coming up with creative and brutally effective ways to cause destruction. Now that they've finally made peace with each other, you have to ask yourself, where is all of that terrifying creativity focused now? It's focused on building new colonies and faster ships, obviously, Velkoth scoffed. I'm not exactly shaking in my boots over here. Perhaps you should be, Yulin replied softly. Commander, when a human gives you a warning, it's not a threat. It's a professional courtesy. It's their way of letting you know that they've already figured out what they're going to do when you ignore them. It's just their process. Velkoth's booming laughter filled the chamber. Let them scheme. I can't wait to see what they've prepared. Did they build 40 ships instead of 37? Did they boost their shields by 5%? It's pathetic. He slammed a massive fist on his console, cutting the link and ending the conversation. The council meeting broke up soon after that. As the ambassadors filed out, they were all murmuring about the tense conversation. The general feeling was that humanity, the new kid on the galactic block, was getting way too big for its britches. A few felt sorry for the human colonies that were about to be turned into dust. People like Yulin shared their concerns in private, but nobody was really listening. In 3 months, The gigantic Zetheran trade fleet was scheduled to arrive right on humanity's doorstep. 300 warships, the largest fleet the Empire had put together in a generation. Velkoth called it a demonstration, a show of force the galaxy would be talking about for centuries. He was right about that part, just not in the way he thought. The Zetheran armada arrived at the meeting point 3 days ahead of schedule. Commander Velkoth loved a good entrance, and this was his masterpiece. 300 warships drifted in the absolute silence of deep space, a pack of glowing, metallic predators. Against the black canvas of the void, their running lights created a brand new, lethal constellation. Every single ship was a beast, designed for pure destruction and wrapped in armor so thick it could ignore most normal weapons. Every last ship in that fleet packed enough firepower to turn a small moon into a cloud of gravel. Velkoth stood on the bridge of his flagship, the dominant Will, just admiring his fleet on the main screen. A feeling of incredible pride washed over him. This was what true power looked like. This was the same force that had crushed 47 star systems into submission. And now he was about to use it to teach some cocky humans a lesson. "All ships are green and ready, Commander," his tactical officer reported. "Excellent." Velkoth settled into his custom-made command chair, built to fit his massive, four-armed frame. "Broadcast my message on all channels. I want the whole sector to hear me." The communications officer tapped her console and gave a nod. "All channels are open, sir. Anyone within 30 light-years will hear it." Velkoth leaned into the mic, his voice a low, commanding growl. "This is High Commander Velkoth of the Zetheran Empire, speaking to all ships in this area. The fleet you are now looking at will be traveling along our historic trade route, which just so happens to pass through territory that the humans have foolishly tried to claim. We are doing this to make one thing perfectly clear. Newcomers do not get to make rules for their elders. The Zetheran Empire goes where it wants, when it wants. Any attempt to stop us will be considered an act of war and will be answered with the full, overwhelming power of this fleet. That is not a threat. It is a simple fact." He ended the transmission with a sharp slice of his hand. "Set our course," he ordered. "Standard formation, and keep the scanners running non-stop. I want to know if a single human ship is out there waiting for us." The entire armada began to move as one, hundreds of ships turning in perfect unison and accelerating toward the border of human space. The sight was both incredible and terrifying. Velkoth had purposely picked a route that cut right through the middle of the human exclusion zone. He didn't want to leave them any doubt, no way for them to say he had just strayed off course. Nope, this was a deliberate parade right across their front lawn, daring them to do something about it. The trip to the border took 6 hours. Velkoth used the time to go over attack strategies. He didn't really think there would be a fight, but if the humans were dumb enough to start one, he wanted the response to be instant and crushing. A quick, brutal lesson would be far more effective than just flying past them. "Commander!" The sensor officer's voice broke the silence. "We are now at the border coordinates the humans sent us." "See anything?" Velkoth asked. "No, sir. Scanners are totally clear. Just empty space. No ships, no stations, not a single defensive buoy. It's a complete void." Velkoth felt a wave of smugness, mixed with just a hint of disappointment. He was right. The humans were all talk. Still, a small part of him had been hoping for a little action, a chance to show off what his fleet was capable of. "Stay on course," he commanded. The armada sailed silently over the invisible line that the humans had designated as their territory. Velkoth made a point to note the exact time. He wanted the official logs to show the precise second the Zetheran Empire proved to the whole galaxy that human declarations meant absolutely nothing. The space on the other side of the line looked exactly the same as the space before it. Same stars, same deep black. The human exclusion zone was nothing but empty, harmless space. "Keep this heading," Velkoth said. "How long until we pass through this so-called zone?" "At this speed, about 8 days, Commander," the navigator answered. "All right. I want full scanner sweeps every 10 minutes. If a single human ship even blips on our screens, I want to know about it immediately." The first 3 hours went by with nothing at all happening. The fleet pushed deeper into the zone, holding its perfect menacing formation. Velkoth took a casual stroll around the bridge of his flagship, The crew was still on high alert, but it was starting to feel like a waste of time. Back in his chair, the tactical screen showed 300 perfect green icons sailing through enemy territory without a care in the world. Velkoth allowed himself a small, self-satisfied smile. This would be a day for the history books. It would be known as the day the Zethran Empire showed the galaxy that humanity's warnings were nothing more than empty threats. Just then, the sensor officer spoke up. "Commander, I've got a contact. One tiny vessel approaching from galactic north." Velkoth hurried over to the sensor station. "What kind of ship is it?" "It's definitely human, sir. The engine signature is a match for their designs. Sir, according to its mass signature, it's just a science ship, not a warship, and it's not showing any shields." Commander Velkoth grumbled from his chair. "A science ship? Put it on the main view screen." A moment later, the giant screen flickered to life, and it was almost comical. Instead of a command bridge, they were looking at what seemed to be a cluttered broom closet, packed wall to wall with gear. It was a joke compared to the vast, polished bridge of Velkoth's flagship. Standing in the middle of the chaos was a human woman in a simple work uniform, looking completely calm. Behind her, maybe 4 other crew members were busy at their posts. "This is Captain Maria Torres of the research vessel Cassandra," she said, her voice as casual as if she were ordering lunch. "You are in a restricted military zone belonging to the planet Earth. You need to turn your fleet around immediately. This will be your only warning." A stunned silence fell over Velkoth's bridge before he let out a sharp snort of a laugh, which quickly turned into a deep, booming roar. His entire crew joined in. "My only warning?" he chuckled, wiping a tear from his eye. "Captain, I command 300 warships. A single one of my ships could turn your little tin can into atoms without even trying. And you're warning me?" They thought this was just a joke, but they were about to learn how terribly wrong they were. On the screen, Captain Torres just nodded slowly, completely unfazed. "I see your fleet, Commander. It is very large, but I'm still asking you to turn around." Velkoth's good humor was evaporating. "Or what? Is your tiny science vessel going to give us a harsh lecture?" "I'm not going to do anything," Torres replied, her voice as solid as steel. "But if you stay on this course, something else will. Please, Commander, just go back. Take the longer route around. It would only add 6 days to your trip. That seems like a small price for avoiding a fight." "The only price being paid today is for your arrogance," Velkoth snarled. "You have 30 seconds to move your ship, or we will move it for you." For just a second, Torres closed her eyes. When she opened them again, her face held an expression he never expected to see. It wasn't fear, and it wasn't anger. It was deep, profound sadness. "Then I am truly sorry," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I'm sorry we couldn't convince you. And I'm sorry for what's about to happen to you and every person in your fleet. We really tried to find another way, but you've left us no choice." 20 seconds, Velkoth snapped, his patience gone. "My crew and I," Torres continued, the words starting to spill out, "we all volunteered for this. We knew the risks. We even drew straws to see who would have the honor of being the last voice you heard, the last person to try and warn you. I won. 10 seconds. Our families have been told. They're proud of us. We all recorded our last words. In my message I said, 'Fire,'" Velkoth ordered. The weapons officer hit a single button. A brilliant beam of pure energy leaped across the void between the 2 ships. In a silent, dazzling flash of light, the tiny research ship, which made no attempt to dodge, simply ceased to exist. "Resume our course," Commander Velkoth said, trying to sound dismissive. But he felt no sense of victory, only a strange, creeping dread. The captain's final words echoed in his head. She had been so calm, so accepting of what was about to happen, as if watching her own ship get destroyed was just the opening move in a much larger game. He forced the thought away. The Cassandra was just an insect. Squashing it meant nothing. He barked, "All ships, stay in formation, proceed on course." The armada of 300 warships pushed forward, passing right through the spot where the human ship had been vaporized. 2 hours passed, then 3. Velkoth stayed on the bridge, his stomach churning. Something felt deeply wrong, but he couldn't put his finger on it. Space was silent and empty. The best scanners in the fleet showed nothing. Every system on every ship was reporting perfect performance. "But sir," the sensor officer said, her voice shaky with confusion, "I'm picking something up. It's not a ship. It's not made of anything. It's just a very strange reading." "Explain strange." "I'm not sure I can, Commander. The sensors are detecting ripples in space-time itself. They don't seem dangerous, just weird. It's as if space itself is humming." "It's a natural gravitational wave," Velkoth suggested, looking for a simple answer. "Maybe," she replied, clearly doubtful. "But I've never seen one like this. It's almost—" She stopped cold, her eyes widening as she stared at her screen. "Sir, it's following us. The readings are locked onto our fleet, moving with us." That sent a genuine shock of alarm through Velkoth. "How is that possible?" "I have no idea, sir." "Are we in danger?" I don't think so. The readings are incredibly faint. Whatever it is, it's not affecting our ship systems. It's just there." Velkoth leaned forward in his chair. "Push the scanners to maximum power. I want to know what this thing is, and send a message to the whole fleet. Ask them if they're seeing it too." The answers flooded in within minutes. Every single ship in the Armada was detecting the exact same thing. A bizarre, invisible ripple in space had formed a bubble around them, shadowing their every move. "Could it be a fleet-wide sensor glitch?" Velkoth asked desperately. "Across 300 ships, sir, all from different manufacturers, the mathematical odds of that are essentially zero." So what in the galaxy was it? Nobody had an answer. The fleet pushed on, but the weird readings didn't go away. They never got stronger or weaker. They just followed the Armada like an invisible shroud, perfectly matching every turn and every change in speed. Over the next few hours, other small problems started to pop up. Tiny errors in the navigation computers, brief, random power flickers, and communication delays that shouldn't exist. None of it was critical, nothing that would normally cause alarm. But the sheer number of tiny problems created a thick fog of anxiety that spread from ship to ship. Velkoth ordered a full diagnostic on his flagship. The results came back completely clean. The ship's computer swore that everything was working perfectly, but the glitches kept happening, as if an invisible saboteur was messing with them in a way their own tools couldn't see. "Commander!" his comms officer called out, her voice tight with stress. "It's the destroyer. Relentless. They're on the outer edge of the fleet. They've gone completely silent." Velkoth spun his chair to face her. "What do you mean, silent?" "They're not answering our hails, sir. Their icon is still green on the tactical map, holding perfect formation, but all we hear is static." "Are we being jammed?" "No sign of jamming, sir. The channel is crystal clear. They're just not answering." A cold knot of fear began twisting in Velkoth's stomach. "Signal the two ships closest to the Relentless. Tell them to get eyes on that ship right now." He waited, his gaze locked on the tactical map. The Relentless sailed onward, its little green marker holding its position perfectly. Its engines were running. Its systems looked 100% normal. So why was nobody answering the call? "Sir," the officer said, her voice now trembling, "the two ships we sent to check on them, they've gone dark too." The cold knot in Velkoth's stomach turned to a block of solid ice. "Both of them?" "Yes, sir. The Iron Fang and the Stormbreaker. They were moving to get a visual on the Relentless. They both went silent about 30 seconds ago." Velkoth stared at the map. 3 ships, all showing perfect operational status, were now completely out of contact. "Are they still moving?" "Yes, sir, holding their positions in the formation flawlessly." "Then who is flying those ships?" The question hung in the dead air of the bridge, and no one had an answer. Velkoth made a choice he knew could be a fatal mistake. "Stop the fleet! All ships, full stop, now!" The command shot through the network. 297 massive warships began to slow to a halt in the blackness of space, but 3 of them didn't. The Relentless, the Iron Fangs, and the Stormbreaker just kept going. "They're ignoring the order," the navigator whispered in awe. Velkoth watched the three green icons shrink on his screen as they sailed away from the safety of the fleet. He waited for them to slow down, to turn, to do anything that would prove someone was still in control. They did nothing. They just flew in a perfectly straight line, becoming ghost ships sailing off into the endless void. They charged headfirst into the Forbidden Zone, shrinking into nothing more than faint blips on the screen. "Commander?" the sensor officer whispered, her voice laced with sheer disbelief. "They're gone." "What do you mean, gone?" "The three ships, sir. They just vanished. It wasn't an attack. There was no explosion, no debris field. One moment they were there, and the next, nothing. Our sensors show empty space." Suddenly, Commander Velkoth felt like all the air had been punched out of his lungs. Across the bridge, the crew stared at their consoles, completely frozen in shock. "Find them!" Velkoth roared, his voice cracking under the strain. "I want a full-power sensor sweep, now! They have to be out there somewhere!" For a full hour, they scanned everything. Long range, short range, every imaging system they had. They found absolutely nothing. Three massive warships, each carrying a crew of 200, had simply blinked out of existence. The human captain's last words echoed in his mind. "I'm sorry for what's about to happen." What in the stars had he just led his fleet into? What kind of cosmic horror had those humans unleashed? Commander Velkoth had been standing on the bridge of his flagship, the Dominant Will, for 36 hours straight, just staring at tactical screens that were showing him the impossible. Around him, his crew moved with a quiet, frantic energy, searching for an answer that wasn't there. In a matter of hours, 47 ships had disappeared. They weren't blown up or disabled. They were just gone, wiped from the universe like a bad thought. 1 second, a ship would be a steady green light on the map, holding its position. The next, there was just empty black space. No fire, no wreckage, not even a single distress call. Nothing. The vanishings were completely random, making no sense at all. Ships on the outer edge of the fleet were taken. Ships tucked safely in the middle were snatched away. It didn't matter if it was a giant battlecruiser or a small escort ship. They all disappeared without any logic or pattern. The only thing that was consistent was the terrifying silence. The second a ship didn't respond to a check-in, you knew it was already gone. "Give me a status update!" Velkoth demanded, his voice strained. His throat felt like sandpaper from shouting orders. "Report!" he yelled again. His tactical officer looked completely exhausted, her scales a pale, chalky gray instead of their usual bright shimmer. Her hands were trembling just above her console. "We're down to 253 ships, Commander. We've lost another 6 in the last hour." 6 more. That was over 12,200 of his soldiers, just deleted. "Any of the remaining ships reporting damage?" he asked, hoping for any clue. "No, sir," she said, her voice hollow. "Every ship still with us is reporting all systems are green. Everything is running perfectly." That was the part that was driving him crazy. The ships that were left were in perfect condition, with no sign they were even in a fight. His crews were starting to lose it, whispering that it felt like something was out there in the darkness, just watching them. But every test they ran came back perfectly clean, right up until another ship would just wink out of existence. "What about the sensors, those spatial ripples you mentioned?" "They're getting stronger, Commander. The whole effect is much more powerful now. A few of my sensor techs are picking up some weird feedback. They say it feels like space itself is alive out here." A nerve in Velkoth's jaw twitched. "That is scientifically impossible." "I know, sir," she replied softly. "It is." He spun around to face the communications officer. "Any word from the humans?" "Nothing but static, sir. We are blasting requests on every known frequency, begging for a ceasefire, for an explanation, for anything. But all we're getting is dead air. Maybe they couldn't hear his calls, or maybe they were just enjoying the show." A dark thought started to creep into Velkoth's mind. What if they were gone too? What if this thing that was erasing his fleet had also wiped out the human colonies, and there was no one left to talk to? But he knew, with a cold, sinking feeling, that wasn't true. He was sure the humans were right there, watching this whole nightmare play out. "Commander!" the navigator shouted, his voice tight with panic. Something's wrong with the jump coordinates. Explain what's wrong, Velkoth snapped. I've been calculating escape routes for the last hour, dozens of them, to every safe system I can think of. But it doesn't matter which destination I put in. The final calculation always shows us jumping deeper into their territory. Velkoth crossed the bridge in 3 huge steps. Put it on the main screen, now! The navigator displayed the calculations, and Velkoth could only stare at the impossible math. Everything he knew about physics screamed that this shouldn't be happening, but the data was right there. Every escape route, every single path to safety somehow bent back toward the heart of human space. It was like the universe had been reshaped into a giant funnel, and they were being pulled down the drain. This can't be happening, Velkoth whispered to himself. To do something like this, you'd have to bend space-time on a scale I can't even comprehend. The energy required would be unbelievable. The navigation officer looked up at him, his face pale. I know, sir, but the math doesn't lie. We can't jump out of here. We're trapped. That single word, trapped, hung in the air on the bridge like a death sentence, caged. All right, we'll get out the old-fashioned way, Velkoth declared. Plot a course to the border using standard engines. We'll crawl our way out if we have to. We already tried that, sir. The ships that attempted to turn and run, they vanished even faster than the ones staying in formation. It's almost like moving backward triggers it. Then we move forward. Sir, forward takes us directly into the core of the zone, straight into human territory. Velkoth had to fight the urge to scream. He held his voice steady through pure force of will. So you're telling me the only direction we can fly without being instantly erased is straight toward Earth? That's what all the data is telling us, sir. A new voice suddenly cut through the thick tension. Commander, we have an incoming message. It's on a human frequency. Every single person on the bridge snapped their head toward the communications station. After hours of being ignored, they were finally getting a reply. On screen, Velkoth ordered. The main view screen flickered to life, but there was no face, just a few simple bone-chilling words. Bright white letters glowed against a black screen. Our translation software took less than a second to process it. You were warned. That was it. 3 words. Then the transmission ended. Velkoth just stared at the blank screen for what felt like an eternity. The entire bridge crew was frozen solid with shock. Reply, he finally choked out. Tell them, message received. And tell them we are requesting immediate talks to arrange our withdrawal. The comms officer's fingers flew across his console. Message sent, sir. And then they waited. 5 minutes felt like an hour, then 10 minutes, then 20. There was nothing but a deep, unnerving quiet. Sir, the tactical officer said, her voice trembling, we've lost 3 more ships just sitting here. Velkoth's 4 hands clenched into fists as hard as stone. His breathing was quick and shallow. He was the one who had marched his fleet into this meat grinder. He was the one who had laughed off their warnings as empty bluffs. He had personally given the order to destroy the human ship Cassandra and had scoffed at its captain's final words. Now, his people were paying the ultimate price for his arrogance. All ships, he said, opening a channel to the entire fleet. This is Commander Velkoth. We have run into a situation that we do not understand. We believe this is some kind of advanced human defensive weapon. Our jump drives are useless. We cannot retreat without causing our own destruction to speed up. Our only logical choice is to push forward and pray to the gods that we can get through this exclusion zone before... He couldn't bring himself to finish the sentence. Before what? Before they were all wiped from existence? Hold a tight formation, he commanded instead. I want every single ship to report any strange readings, no matter how small, the instant you see them. Navigation, find the absolute fastest way through this hell. I don't care if it takes us right past Earth's front door. We have to get out of this sector. Sir, his sensor officer whispered, her voice so quiet he could barely hear it. You need to see this. Velkoth was at her station in a flash. She pulled up a display of the space right around their ship. At first, it just looked black and empty, but then she started cycling through different sensor frequencies, looking at parts of the light spectrum that their eyes couldn't normally see. The blood in Velkoth's veins turned to ice. They weren't flying through empty space at all. They were inside something, some kind of impossibly massive structure. It looked like a giant cosmic spiderweb stretching in every direction, far beyond what their sensors could even measure. And they could see countless tiny threads, filaments made of something that wasn't matter or energy, connecting that web to every single one of his ships. "What in all the hells am I looking at?" he breathed. "I have no idea, sir. It's been all around us this entire time. We just couldn't see it until I ran a full spectrum analysis. I think it's some kind of field, a network, and it has us completely caught." "And the ships that vanished?" She pulled up the sensor recordings from the seconds right before a destroyer disappeared. On the main screen, Commander Velkoth watched in absolute horror as the thread connected to his destroyer began to thrum with a soft glow. It grew brighter and brighter, then pulled tight. The warship seemed to fold in on itself, its metal frame twisting in ways that broke the laws of physics, and then it simply winked out of existence. The thread that had snared it hung in the void for a second, almost as if it were admiring its work, before it dissolved back into the shimmering web. "It's eating them," the sensor officer breathed, her voice trembling with raw fear. "The field, this thing, it's devouring our ships." For the first time in his long and decorated career, Velkoth felt a cold, coiling dread in his gut. He had fought in dozens of wars and stared death down more times than he could count, but he always knew his enemy. You can fight another ship, you can counter its weapons, you can outmaneuver its commander. But how are you supposed to fight this? How do you wage war against the very fabric of space? How could you possibly defeat an enemy you couldn't see, couldn't target, and couldn't even begin to understand? "Commander!" The communications officer's shout snapped him out of his spiraling thoughts. "We have another incoming message. It's not from the humans, sir. It's from the Endless Conquest. It's Captain Than's battlecruiser. We're getting reports of a visual anomaly. Put him through." Captain Than's face appeared on the monitor. He was a hardened veteran, a legend from a dozen different conflicts, even more experienced than Velkoth. Velkoth had known the man for years and had never once seen him look scared, but right now, he looked like he'd seen a ghost. "Commander, I have no idea how to describe what we're seeing. My crew is reporting glitches in the void, phantom images flickering in the space between our ships where there should be nothing but stars. And sir, 3 of my crew are gone. They just vanished from inside sealed corridors on my own ship." "Gone? From inside your vessel?" "Yes, sir. Our internal sensors recorded it. One moment they were walking down a passageway, the next they were just gone. It was like they stepped through a doorway that wasn't there and just disappeared into nothing." Before Velkoth could even process that, a new alarm started blaring across the bridge. "Sir, we have multiple ships reporting the same thing," the tactical officer cried out, her voice shaking. "We have personnel disappearing across the entire fleet. Equipment is fading into thin air right off their mountings. Some ships are reporting that entire sections have just gone dark. When they send teams to check it out, the sections are just empty. Wiped clean, as if everything inside, including the search party, just blinked out of reality. Can you imagine commanding the most powerful fleet in the galaxy, only to watch it get taken apart by an enemy you can't even see?" That was the waking nightmare Commander Velkoth was now trapped in. This wasn't a war, it was an extermination. Something was passing right through the armored hulls of his warships, snatching his people and their gear and pulling them into nothing. How do you possibly fight a ghost that treats solid steel like it's not even there? Stick around to find out how this impossible battle ends. "All ships, full lockdown," Velkoth ordered, but a cold sickness in his stomach told him it was a useless command. "No one moves alone. Teams of 4 at all times. Seal every non-essential deck." The orders were followed in an instant. It didn't make a single bit of difference. Over the next 6 hours, Velkoth could only sit and watch in stunned horror as his command was methodically wiped out, not in a brilliant flash of combat, but slowly, carefully, as if some unseen hunter was taking its time to enjoy every single kill. It seemed to have all the time in the universe, and his fleet was trapped in a cage with no way out. Entire battleships started to disappear, sometimes 2 or even 3 at a time. The strange energy web that had trapped them seemed to pulse with a little more light each time a ship was taken, almost as if it were feeding. Crew members were snatched out of locked rooms, from behind fortified bulkheads, and even from the command bridges of their own ships. One second they were there, a living, breathing part of the crew, and the next, they were just gone. They left nothing behind but their terrified shipmates who were left scrambling to explain the impossible thing they'd just witnessed. A few ships managed to broadcast for a few moments before they were erased, and we could hear the frantic screams of the missing, all of them crying that they were trapped in some other place, a dimension where just existing was agony. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the screaming would stop and the channel would fall silent. A new report flashed on his screen. The Iron Storm, one of his most powerful battlecruisers, had been found dead in space, just drifting. There wasn't a single living soul on board. All 800 members of its crew had vanished from a ship that didn't have a single scratch or burn mark on its hull. It was in perfect working order, its autopilot still humming. It was just completely empty. When a search and rescue team boarded the cruiser to find out what happened, they vanished too. After that, Velkoth ordered everyone to stand down. It was a hopeless situation. Whatever was doing this didn't play by any rules of war he had ever known, and every single move he made to fight back just cost him more of his people. "Give me a status report. What's our remaining strength?" he asked, his voice sounding thin and empty. "We're down to only 12 ships, Commander," the tactical officer replied. He could see the fresh tear tracks on her cheeks, and he didn't have the heart to blame her. "At this rate, the entire fleet will be gone in less than 18 hours. 18 hours. In less than a day, his grand armada of 300 warships and more than 500,000 souls would be completely and utterly erased from existence. "Keep trying to contact the humans," Velkoth ordered, his voice cracking with a rage that was born from pure terror. Tell them we surrender. Offer them whatever they want. Tell them this whole sector of space is theirs. Say anything you have to, just get them to call this thing off." The comms officer's hands flew over her console, sending out desperate pleas on every channel they knew, begging, pleading, and promising the entire galaxy if the humans would just please answer the call. For 3 agonizing hours, they broadcast 147 distress signals into the darkness, and the only response they received was a deep and profound silence. The mighty Zethan war machine, an army that had shattered entire worlds for sport, could do nothing but fly deeper into an invisible prison that was taking them apart piece by piece. A bizarre pulsing energy net had them completely surrounded, feeding on their ships, and they were utterly helpless. Commander Velkoth couldn't get the image of the human captain they had just executed out of his mind. Her sad eyes, her final, haunting warning. She knew this would happen. All of them knew. The humans had tried to tell them, tried to save them from their own arrogance, but the Zythan High Command had been far too proud to ever listen. "Commander," his sensor officer stammered, his voice choked with fear. "I'm detecting something up ahead. A ship. Its design is human." A surge of wild, desperate hope shot through Velkoth. "Put it on the main screen, now!" he roared. "On it, sir. They're opening a communications channel." A calm, human face appeared on the monitor. He was a middle-aged man wearing a crisp uniform, and he wore an expression of what looked almost like pity. "Commander Velkoth," the man said in a steady voice, "my name is Captain James Rivera. I am here to act as a witness." "A witness?" The word made no sense. "We need your assistance. Your weapon, this trap, it is annihilating my fleet. You have to shut it down." Rivera just slowly shook his head, a look of what seemed like genuine regret in his eyes. "I'm afraid I can't do that, Commander. No one can. The moment your fleet crossed into the exclusion zone, the defense grid came online automatically. It was designed to be impossible to deactivate while unauthorized ships are still inside its perimeter." "Then authorize us. For God's sake, we will leave this instant." "You can't leave," Rivera said gently. "The grid won't allow it. I'm sorry, Commander. I truly am. But we warned you again and again. You made the choice not to listen." "This is a slaughter," Velkoth screamed. "No," Rivera corrected him, his voice never wavering. "This is self-defense. You brought an entire war fleet into our protected territory after we repeatedly asked you to stay away. You destroyed our ship, the Cassandra, when she made one last attempt to save you from yourselves. Every life that is lost here today is the direct result of your choices." "We didn't know. We had no idea you had anything like this out here." "That is precisely why we warned you," Rivera replied. "It's the very reason the exclusion zone exists. It's why we pleaded with the Galactic Council to make it clear that our borders were not up for negotiation. We did everything in our power to make sure this day never came. You forced our hand. You left us with absolutely no other choice." Another 3 ships disappeared from Velkoth's tactical display, just blinking out of existence. "What is this insanity?" Velkoth's voice was shaking with pure terror. "What have you people done to this entire sector?" There was a long pause from Rivera, as if he was deciding just how much he should say. "A long time ago, when our world was still busy tearing itself apart, we imagined weapons so horrific we swore we would never actually build them. One of them was a terrifying theory about weaponizing space-time itself, creating pockets of reality that could trap a ship, lock it in time, or just delete it. We were wise enough never to use something like that on our own people. We buried the entire project. But when we finally made it to the stars, we found out just how many bullies were waiting for us in the dark and how much they enjoyed picking on the new species on the block." His voice trailed off for a moment. "We built 50 of them. 50 fully automated defense platforms hidden throughout the exclusion zone. Each one generates a field that can detect, analyze, and neutralize any unauthorized vessel. They're powered by vacuum energy, the ambient energy of space itself. They can operate for 10,000 years without a single technician." "You've turned your entire border into a cosmic graveyard," Velkoth whispered, horrified. "No, we turned our border into a warning that has teeth," Rivera corrected. "Every other race uses fleets to guard their territory, but ships can be destroyed and fleets can be defeated. We decided that anyone who dared to invade human space wouldn't be fighting our ships. They would be fighting the fabric of space itself, and you can't win a war against the laws of physics." Velkoth's display now showed only 87 ships remaining. As he watched, the number flickered and dropped to 84. "You're monsters," he choked out. "Perhaps," Rivera conceded. "But we are also alive. We are free, and our homes will never be threatened by anyone ever again." He paused. "For what it's worth, Commander, I truly am sorry. I hope you believe me when I say we never wanted this. We just wanted to be left alone." The communication link went dead. Velkoth stood frozen on his bridge, a solitary statue watching his fleet get picked off ship by ship, knowing with a cold, terrifying certainty that he would not live to see another sunrise. His very last thought, as the air around him began to shimmer and distort, was that the humans had been telling the truth all along. They had tried to save him, and his pride had been too great to listen. For the first time in 300 years, the Galactic Council chamber was filled to capacity. Every species, every coalition, every major galactic power had sent a representative. They all sat in their designated pods, shrouded in a tense, heavy silence as they waited for the session to begin. For 2 agonizing weeks, the galaxy had been holding its breath. 2 weeks since the entire Zithran fleet, 300 warships and over 500,000 souls, sailed into the human exclusion zone and simply disappeared. The silence in the Grand Council chamber wasn't respectful. It was the kind of silence born from pure, gut-wrenching fear. Speaker Tom Von, a floating bird-like creature, rose from his pod, his beak trembling as he spoke. "This emergency session of the Galactic Council is now underway. We are gathered to address the baffling disappearance of the Zithran Imperial Trade Fleet," he announced, his voice echoing. "Their last confirmed position was within the territory claimed by the species known as humans from planet Earth." He paused, as if bracing for a shockwave. "Ambassador Chen of Earth has agreed to speak. I must remind you all, this is a diplomatic inquiry, not an execution. Every delegate will behave, and you will let the ambassador speak her piece." As if on cue, Sarah Chen walked through the colossal main doors. She crossed the vast floor alone, a solitary figure in a plain gray suit, standing in the very heart of the galactic government. She looked exactly the same as she had 3 months prior, calm, composed, her face a perfect mask. She certainly didn't look like someone who might be responsible for the single greatest act of mass murder in galactic history. "Ambassador Chen," the speaker said, his voice tight with tension, "this council demands to know what happened to the Zithran fleet. Do you have any answers for us?" "Yes," Chen said. That single simple word hit the room like a thunderclap. She wasn't going to play games. She wasn't going to deny a thing. Just yes. "Then please," the speaker urged, "enlighten us." Chen took a slow moment, her gaze sweeping across the chamber, making eye contact with dozens of alien ambassadors. When she finally spoke, her voice was crystal clear, ringing through the immense hall. "The Zithran fleet entered our restricted territory after being warned, repeatedly, not to. They knew precisely where the border was. They were told not to cross it. They chose to ignore our warnings. Our automated defense systems activated precisely as designed. The fleet was neutralized." The chamber erupted into chaos. A tidal wave of shouts in 100 different languages crashed through the hall, a symphony of rage, confusion, and raw terror. The speaker had to slam his gavel 3 times just to be heard. "Are you admitting that you did this?" roared the Zithran replacement, a furious commander named Vishkal, his scales flushing a deep, violent crimson. "I am confirming that our automated defense system is 100% effective," Ambassador Chen replied, her voice still impossibly calm. "500,000 souls," he shrieked. "You erased 500,000 of my people, and you have the audacity to stand there and admit it?" Chen's eyes locked onto his. "Yes, Commander, and I am truly sorry for your loss," Ambassador Chen stated, her voice a bizarre cocktail of sympathy and steel. "But we gave them every opportunity. We warned you right here in this chamber 3 months ago. We sent another warning the moment your fleet breached our space, and then a small, unarmed science vessel, the Cassandra, made one final, desperate plea for them to turn back, and your High Commander vaporized it. He took a message of peace as an act of aggression and led his armada straight into the very consequences he was warned about. The blame for what happened next lies squarely on his shoulders." "You butchered them!" Vreshkal screamed. "We defended our home," Chen corrected him, her tone unwavering. "There is a fundamental difference. This council must condemn this act," Vreshkal begged, scanning the room for allies. "We cannot allow one species to annihilate a fleet without consequence. It was the Zithrans today. But it could be any one of you tomorrow." He wasn't wrong, and you could see a ripple of fear and agreement spread through the delegates. But then, Ambassador Creel of the Van Collective, an ancient reptilian being, spoke up, her voice like cracking ice. "Ambassador Chen, I believe I have a question that cuts to the heart of this matter. You claim your defenses responded as designed. Could you elaborate on what these systems are? How did they make 300 warships vanish without a trace? No debris, no bodies, not even a whisper of an energy signature?" Chen remained silent for a long beat. "To explain our technology in detail," she said at last, "would be to hand our most vital military secrets to every government represented here. That is not something we are prepared to do. However, given the gravity of the situation, the government of Earth has authorized me to provide a limited demonstration." She touched a small device, and massive holographic images bloomed in the air above her, filled with impossible equations, strange maps of space-time, and schematics that looked less like weapons and more like cosmic art. During the last major conflict on our world, long before we achieved unity, several nations were exploring theoretical weapons capable of warping space and time. The projects were abandoned, deemed too dangerous, too unethical to exist. But when we reached the stars and discovered just how many bullies occupied the galactic playground, we decided to dust off that old research. It took us 60 years to perfect the theory and another 20 to build the hardware. The result is a system we call the exclusion net. She gestured, and the display shifted to a map of her solar system. 50 glowing points appeared in a perfect calculated orbit. 50 automated platforms. Each one projects a field that blankets our entire territory. These fields overlap, creating an invisible, impenetrable web of twisted space-time. When an unauthorized vessel enters our space, the net activates and does what? Creel insisted. It removes them, Chen stated plainly. The ships aren't destroyed, they aren't atomized, they are folded into infinitesimally small pocket dimensions, entirely new realities that exist alongside our own, but which can never, ever be accessed. From our perspective, they simply cease to exist. A collective, horrified gasp swept through the room. Some delegates began chanting ancient prayers. Others just stared, their faces completely slack with disbelief. "Are you telling this council," the speaker stammered, his voice trembling, "that the entire Zithran fleet is still out there, trapped in another dimension?" "That's one way of looking at it," Chen confirmed, though the term "exists" is not entirely accurate. You see, these pocket dimensions were never intended to support life. They don't adhere to our laws of physics, and time itself has no meaning there. Anything sent into the net is instantly locked in a state we call quantum stasis. It is neither alive nor dead. "That is monstrous," someone whispered from the gallery. "And it's effective," Chen countered, her voice as cold and vast as the weapon she was describing. "Imagine you're the biggest bully on the playground. You swagger up to the quiet new kid to steal his lunch money, only to discover his dad is the heavyweight champion of the world." That was the reality check the Zithran Empire just received. "You have condemned my people to an eternal hell," the Zithran commander Vreshkal screamed, his voice cracking with rage and grief. "Trapped forever in some waking nightmare because of your exclusion net." If you've ever been pushed around and dreamed of the day you could finally stand up for yourself, you need to hear what she said next. "That is quite a vivid description," Ambassador Chen responded, her composure a wall of ice against his fury. "But it's the exact opposite of torture. They feel nothing. For those soldiers, time itself is frozen. They can't suffer because they can't experience anything. Think of it less as a prison and more as an endless, dreamless sleep they will never wake from." The old ambassador Creel leaned forward. "Is there any way to undo it? To bring them back?" "In theory, yes. If we were to shut down the platforms, the energy grids would collapse, and whatever is trapped inside would be ejected back into normal space-time," Chen explained. "But taking down that net would leave our homeworld completely vulnerable. We have no plans of ever doing that." Vreshkal slammed his fist on the console. "So they are gone for good." Chen's face became like stone. They were gone the moment Commander Veliksoth chose to believe our warnings were a bluff and gave the order to attack. "We could not have been more direct, Commander," Chen went on, her eyes sweeping across the chamber of stunned alien representatives. "We sent warnings on every frequency known to this council. Your High Commander made a bet. He bet that a young species like humanity was all talk. He wagered that we couldn't possibly possess the technology to halt his glorious armada." She let the words hang in the silent room. "He lost. That is a tragedy for his people, but it is not our crime." A deep, heavy silence fell over the assembly. You could practically hear the gears turning in every delegate's mind as they furiously recalculated humanity's place in the galactic order. The speaker, Tom Von, was the first to find his words. "Ambassador Chen, this council has a great deal to discuss. However, I have one last question. Now that the galaxy knows this weapon exists, and you have even offered us a glimpse of how it works," Tom Von continued, "are you not worried that other galactic powers will now race to build their own version, or even worse, find a way to counter yours?" For the first time all day, the slightest trace of a cold, confident smile touched Ambassador Chen's lips. "They are more than welcome to try," she said. "The quantum principles it's built on took our greatest minds centuries to perfect. Even with the breadcrumbs I've left for you today, it would take your best scientists hundreds of years just to understand the basics. And by that point," she added, "our technology will be light years ahead of this. That exclusion net that has everyone so rattled, That's last generation tech, speaker. We're already working on versions 2 and 3. She let that new information sink in. But most importantly, she finished, her voice becoming as cold and vast as the space between worlds, we truly hope no one is ever foolish enough to force us to do this a second time. Consider this your one and only warning. Earth has borders. They are not suggestions. If you cross them, we will not fight you. You will simply stop existing. That is not a threat, it is a promise. And what if we declare this a crime against the galaxy? The Zithran ambassador shrieked. What if this council votes to place sanctions on you, to force you to take apart these horrors? Chen's polite professional smile evaporated. Then we will respectfully decline, and we will withdraw our membership from this galactic council. We came out here looking for peace and cooperation. If this body is incapable of protecting our fundamental right to exist without being attacked, she went on, if our simple wish to be left alone is twisted into an act of hostility, then we do not belong here. We will go back to our home system, lock the door behind us, and cut off all contact with the rest of you. You would isolate yourselves completely? Creel asked, his face a mask of total disbelief. So no trade, no cultural exchange, zero contact whatsoever? The speaker pushed, his voice echoing in the still chamber. If that's what it takes to be safe, then yes, Ambassador Chen replied, her voice steady as a rock. We did just fine for 10,000 years on our one little planet. We can do it again in our little patch of the galaxy. It is not the future we wanted, but it's better than constantly fighting off bullies who can't accept that there's a new kid on the cosmic block. She scanned the room, making eye contact with the council members one last time. We came out here hoping to find friends, she said, a note of real sadness in her voice. Instead, we found predators. You left us no choice but to become the one thing a predator learns to respect and avoid. This was not the story we wanted for ourselves, but it's the one you forced us to write. The Zithan Empire gambled with the lives of its people, she stated plainly. The fallout from that bad bet is their problem, not ours. With that, she gave a respectful nod to Speaker Tomvan and turned to leave. Wait! A voice shouted. It was Ambassador Ulin. In a stunning breach of protocol, his personal transport pod descended to the floor. Ambassador Chen, could I have a private word with you? Chen paused, her interest clearly piqued. Of course, Ambassador. The instant the two of them were inside an adjacent chamber, the main hall exploded into chaos. As the door hissed shut, Ulin's calm diplomatic facade crumbled. I tried to warn him, he whispered, his voice strained with anxiety. 3 months back, I told Velixoth that your people were not to be taken lightly. I told him you didn't make empty threats. He wouldn't listen. We know, Chen answered softly. We monitored that entire conversation. We appreciate you trying to talk some sense into him. Appreciated enough to tell me the real story? Ulin pressed, his eyes locked on hers. What you told the council, that whole speech about pocket dimensions and frozen time, that was the version for the public, wasn't it? There's more to your exclusion net than that. Chen held his gaze for a long, quiet moment before giving a slow, meaningful nod. Yes, there's a great deal more. Are you going to tell me what that is? Why is it so important for you to know? Chen countered. Because my entire career has been dedicated to studying your species, Ulin replied. And if there is one thing I've learned about humans, it's that you, Masi, are the galaxy's ultimate long-term strategists. You don't just have a plan, you have plans within plans, and backup plans for your backup plans. That net is a truly terrifying piece of defensive tech, he admitted, but I refuse to believe it's the only card you're holding. Chen's expression was a perfect poker face, impossible to read, yet her silence was an answer in itself. I can tell you this much, she finally said. Those platforms that create the pockets of frozen space, they are 100% defensive. They only power up when an uninvited ship crosses into our sovereign space. However, we also have offensive systems, weapons that can hit any target, across any distance, against any government that declares itself an enemy of Earth. We have never fired them. We pray we never have to, but they are very real. Hidden somewhere in your protected zone, Ulin guessed. Chen shook her head. Hidden everywhere. The two words struck him like a physical force. "We've had 80 years to get ready, Ambassador. 80 years to plant our seeds and set up our tripwires. We made absolutely certain that the survival of our homeworld would never depend on the outcome of a single fight in one small sector of space. We are a careful people. Some might call us paranoid. Maybe they're right, but that paranoia is what has kept our species from going extinct." A cold dread trickled down Ulin's spine. "Are you telling me that Earth can strike any target anywhere in the galaxy instantly?" "What we are telling you is that anyone who brings harm to Earth will spend the rest of their life regretting it. A very, very short rest of their life," Chen corrected. "We don't advertise this fact because we are not looking for a fight, but if our hand is ever forced, we will do whatever it takes to survive. That is the real point of the exclusion net, Ambassador. It is not just a shield for our planet. It is a sign to the rest of you that we have thought of every possible attack, and we have an answer ready for every single one." She started for the door, then paused to add one last thing. "And thank you truly for trying to warn them," she said, her voice softening. "This galaxy is in desperate need of more level-headed people like you. I just hope that someday others will finally start to listen. Until then, we'll keep our guard up and pray that the fate of the Zethan Armada is a lesson everyone else takes to heart." And with that, she departed, leaving Ambassador Ulin to process the terrifying new truth of what humanity represented. They weren't conquerors trying to build an empire. They were something much more dangerous. They were survivors, so ferociously dedicated to their own existence that they had quietly turned themselves into the one force in the galaxy that everyone would learn to leave alone. Back in the main hall, the shouting matches were still raging, but Ulin knew it was just for show now. The Council would release an official statement condemning Earth's actions. They would file formal complaints. They would demand more transparency. And in the end, they would do nothing at all. Because nobody, not a single person, was eager to find out what other tricks humanity had up its sleeve. The Zethan Empire had gambled everything, and it had lost everything. No one was in a hurry to make that same mistake. Just 6 months later, the galactic map looked completely different. The biggest change was the Zethan Empire itself. It was gone. Without its military leaders and the fist of fear that kept its systems in line, the empire crumbled like a sandcastle against the tide. In a flash, 47 star systems, crushed under the Zethan boot for generations, threw off their chains. Some declared their independence on the spot. Others scrambled to form new alliances. A few collapsed into civil war, but mostly a massive wave of freedom was washing over the galaxy. The Galactic Council sent out a few peacekeepers, but mostly decided to just grab some popcorn and see how it all played out. Nobody was in a hurry to piece the old empire back together, not when the alternative was letting countless enslaved people taste freedom for the first time. The Zethan acting commander, Fresh Call, the same officer who had screamed insults at Ambassador Chen, tried to hold his crumbling empire together for 3 weeks before he finally threw in the towel. He sent out one last desperate message to the entire galaxy. "The Zethan Empire is finished," he announced, his voice thick with the ashes of defeat. "We built our power on the lie that we were invincible. Earth showed us the truth. Our legendary fleet, our beloved commander, our national pride, all of it gone in the blink of an eye because we were too arrogant to even imagine we could lose. Let our complete and total ruin be a warning," he said, "to anyone out there who thinks might is the only thing that makes you right. The rules of this game have changed forever." The very next day, he resigned his commission and vanished on some quiet farm world, refusing to ever speak again about the fleet or his spectacular failure. In the Galactic Council, the shift was quieter, but just as massive. A new age had dawned, and suddenly, the quiet new species from that little blue planet was getting a whole lot of attention and respect. It was like the entire galaxy remembered its manners overnight. Species known for their loud threats and aggressive flexing were suddenly choosing their words very, very carefully. Big plans for military expansion were quietly shoved into dusty filing cabinets. Trade arguments that would have started wars just a week ago were now being settled with, of all things, polite conversation. And the reason for this sudden galactic charm school? It was the giant, terrifying elephant in every room. Earth's no-go zone. Nobody dared to say its name. But you could feel its presence everywhere. It shaped every treaty, every negotiation, every strategic thought. A single question hung in the air. If humans could make the Zitherans completely disappear, what could they do to us? Ambassador Chen saw the change up close. Delegates who once wouldn't even look her way now approached her with this strange, almost fearful respect. Some tried to cozy up to her, asking for advice and hoping to get on Earth's good side. Others gave her a wide berth, like they were afraid that a simple disagreement might get their entire civilization deleted from the star maps. It was exhausting. "They're terrified of us," she confessed to her aide one evening. "And that's the one thing we never, ever wanted." "We just wanted to be left alone," the ambassador sighed. Her aide replied, "In this galaxy, being left alone means being feared. There's no in-between. Nobody respects a fence unless they think it's electric." Chen nodded grimly. "I know, but that doesn't mean I have to like it." That invisible electric fence, the exclusion zone, had become a bizarre tourist spot, though nobody was stupid enough to actually touch it. Ships would creep toward the boundary, getting just close enough to feel that weird ripple in space-time before slamming their engines into full reverse. Some captains would hold quiet memorials for Zitharan crew they'd known, but most of them just came to stare at the spot where 300 warships had simply ceased to exist. Near one of the main entry points, humanity built a memorial station. How do you recover when your entire empire is brought to its knees in a single afternoon by the weakest species in the galaxy? What happens when the quiet kid who never bothers anyone finally gets up and lays out the schoolyard bully with one punch? You end up like Crinal, a young Zitharan officer, staring at the tombstone humanity built on the grave of his people. Etched into it were the names of every crew member from the science vessel. Cassandra, the last humans who tried to warn his people. Beneath their names was a single haunting line. They volunteered to be the final warning. They prayed you would listen. If you've ever wondered what happens when you push someone too far, you're about to find out. A message scrolled for all to see. We want to be perfectly clear. This protected zone isn't an attack. It's an appeal for peace. All we ask is that you respect our space, just as we respect yours. The fleet that crossed this line ignored countless warnings. What happened to them was a tragedy that could have been avoided. We sincerely hope no other civilization ever forces our hand like this again. The message ended with, "We would much rather be your partners than your enemies. The choice, now and forever, is yours." Directly beneath the words, a shimmering line of energy sliced through the void, marking the boundary they had set. The unspoken warning was crystal clear. Cross this line uninvited, and you will meet the exact same fate as the Zitharan fleet. It was a simple, ruthless, and absolute guarantee. In the months that followed, ships from every corner of known space would drift in, read the message, and silently turn back. This new understanding of humanity sent shockwaves through the galactic community. Trade deals that had been stuck in negotiations for years were suddenly approved and signed. All at once, everyone wanted to be friends, suggesting joint research projects and cultural exchange programs. Nobody said it out loud, but you didn't have to be a genius to get it. Being friends with Earth was a lot more profitable than daring to be its enemy. Human colonies outside the protected zone saw a huge drop in pirate attacks. Smugglers who used to see human cargo ships as easy money now stayed far, far away. Bully species that used to shake down human settlements for protection money suddenly found other hobbies. And the few idiots who decided to test humanity's new reputation, they just vanished. Sometimes their ships were found months later, drifting and powerless, with no crew and no sign of a fight. Earth never took credit. It didn't have to. 6 months after the Zitharan fleet was erased, an ambassador named Yulin published a paper called The Quiet Ones, an analysis of human galactic policy. It instantly became mandatory reading for every diplomat in the galaxy. Its main point was shockingly simple. Humans do not make threats they can't back up. They don't posture, they don't brag, and they never, ever bluff. When they draw a line in the sand or in space, that line is real. And when they give you a warning, you would be incredibly smart to listen. The paper looked at the terrifying and strange patterns throughout human history. It showed that if you left them alone, they were the most cooperative and friendly neighbors you could ask for. But if you backed them into a corner, if you gave them absolutely no way out, they would invent something so reality-shattering that it rewrote the rules of war itself. Things like nuclear fire, genetically engineered plagues, self-aware AI, and even weapons that could tear holes in space-time. Humans, Yulin wrote, are not the most aggressive species. They're not the most warlike or even the most violent. But when their survival is on the line, they are, without a doubt, the most terrifyingly creative. They go into every fight assuming they might lose, which makes them prepare for every nightmare scenario they can imagine. This makes them infinitely more dangerous than any race that thinks winning is just about having bigger ships or more powerful guns. The paper's final conclusion sent a chill down the spine of every military leader who read it. The galaxy has two choices. Option 1, we treat Earth's borders as absolute, respect their territory, and live peacefully with a species that truly just wants to be left alone. Option 2, we can keep poking the bear and find out what other unspeakable nightmares they've been cooking up in their labs. The Zithran Empire chose option 2, let their ghosts be a lesson to all of us. At the military academy on Kvin Prime, every cadet was now required to study Yulin's paper, along with a deep dive analysis of what happened to the Zithran Armada. The lessons were hammered in with brutal clarity. You will respect the borders of other species, you will listen to all warnings, and you will never, ever assume that having better tech or more ships guarantees a victory. One combat simulation, in particular, became the new gold standard for training. Cadets were put in a virtual command chair with a simple problem. Your fleet is approaching a defensive line set up by a local species. They have given you a final warning not to cross. Your bosses have ordered you to break through their space and grab a strategic resource. The simulation would then ask, "What is your command?" And every single cadet quickly learned there was only one right answer. You disobey the order. You refuse to advance. You might survive a fight against enemy ships. You cannot survive a fight against the laws of physics once they've been turned into a weapon. More importantly, following an order that gets your whole fleet vaporized doesn't help anyone. They started calling it the Zitharan scenario. Back in human territory, the advancements were massive but completely invisible. Those 50 colossal platforms generating the exclusion field were being constantly tweaked and upgraded. Their quantum cores got regular recalibrations, and their software was always being updated, preparing for threats nobody had even dreamed of yet. But to anyone watching from the outside, the platforms looked exactly the same as they always had. They ran so perfectly that all the groundbreaking work was done in secret. Ambassador Chen wasn't bluffing when she told her rivals that Earth had a few more aces up its sleeve. The part she left out was just how enormous that secret program was. Way beyond their defensive shield, Earth had quietly launched 300 automated defense platforms into the deep black of space, cloaking them along major shipping lanes, tucking them away near busy star systems, and setting them up at key choke points to take out any threat to Earth or its colonies. Every single one was armed to the gills. They were built with the same reality-warping tech as the exclusion net, but these were made for surgical strikes, not for erasing an entire area. They had never been used, not even once. Almost no one in the galaxy had a clue they were out there, and that was exactly how Earth wanted it. The chief of Earth's Strategic Defense Command had a saying, "The most powerful weapon is the one you never have to fire." The exclusion net had worked. It stopped one catastrophic threat and scared off 1,000 more just by being there. It was the very definition of a successful deterrent. But in private, the arguments were fierce and unending. The deaths of 500,000 Zitharans weighed heavily on many human leaders. Some argued there had to have been another way, a method to just disable the fleet instead of wiping it from existence. The counter-argument was always the same. Anything less than complete obliteration would have been seen as just a temporary setback. The Zetharans would have rebuilt, reloaded, and returned even stronger. The debates never went anywhere. The exclusion net stayed on. The border was sealed tight, and the galaxy slowly got used to this new normal. 3 years after his empire crumbled, a young Zitharan officer named Krenal found himself on patrol near what was once his people's territory. He was now the captain of a small corvette, flying the flag of the new Zitharan Federation. He was on a peacekeeping detail, trying to keep the shattered pieces of his old empire from falling apart completely. One day, his patrol took him dangerously close to the shimmering wall of Earth's exclusion zone. He was just a kid when High Commander Velkoth led that fleet to its doom, but the disaster had torn his own family to shreds. He lost an uncle, a pair of cousins, and a bunch of friends from his childhood. They had all signed up filled with patriotic fire, eager to go teach those humans a lesson. Not one of them ever came home. Krenal ordered his ship to hold its position at what he hoped was a safe distance, close enough to see the human memorial station on his screen, but far enough not to set off any alarms. My first officer, a tough old veteran from the Imperial Navy, came to stand beside me on the bridge. "Here to pay your respects, sir?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. "Something like that," I answered quietly, my eyes fixed on the memorial hanging in the darkness. "Did you lose anyone on those ships?" He sighed, a long, slow sound. "Too many. Good men, incredible fighters. Just doing what they were told. Same as any of us would have." I stared at the monument the humans had constructed, a silent tribute to a slaughter. "They didn't have to die like that," I finally managed to say, my voice thick. "No," the old soldier said, his voice a low growl of agreement. "They certainly did not." He looked over at me, his eyes catching the distant starlight. "But why? Why would the humans build something so absolute?" "I've wondered that 1,000 times myself, sir," the vet sighed, his voice full of weariness. "I've gone over every single report, every analysis, and I think the answer is a lot simpler than we want to believe. They were scared to death." "Of us?" The thought was almost funny. "Of everyone," he corrected me. "Try to see it their way. Earth is one tiny planet with just one species. We're 1,000 species scattered across 1,000,000 worlds with fleets big enough to block out their sun. To them, the universe was crawling with monsters that could wipe them out in the blink of an eye," he continued. "They knew they could never survive a long war against the big empires. They couldn't compete with our manufacturing, so they built something that made giant fleets and massive armies totally pointless." I nodded, the chilling logic of it all finally hitting me. They made a weapon so terrifying nobody would ever dream of attacking them again. "It was more than just a weapon, sir," he said, his voice softer now. "It was a guarantee, a promise you couldn't afford to test." Commander Velkoth thought they were bluffing. He couldn't wrap his head around the idea that a species would actually use something like the exclusion net. But the one thing you learn about humans is that they don't bluff. They told us exactly what would happen if we crossed that line, and we did it anyway. "So we're just supposed to hate them forever?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The veteran was silent for a long moment. "I don't know. A part of me does. They killed my friends, destroyed our empire, and changed our lives for good. But another part of me knows we were given every single chance to turn around. Our pride was just too strong to let us listen." He pointed a clawed hand at the memorial on the screen. "The humans built that. Not as some victory trophy, but to honor their own dead, too. The crew of their ship, the Cassandra, the one that sent that last desperate message begging us to back off. That's got to mean something, right? They never wanted any of this. They did everything they possibly could to prevent it. We were the ones who backed them into a corner." I couldn't look away from the screen. "If you had been in charge that day, would you have done things differently?" "I hope to God I would have," the veteran said, his voice heavy with old grief. "I hope I would have listened to their Captain Torres and ordered a retreat. But I was raised in the old empire, sir. I was taught that running was for cowards. If I'd been standing in Commander Velkoth's boots, I'm terrified I would have made the exact same disastrous mistake." He paused, the words getting stuck in his throat. That's the thing that haunts me. Not that our people died, but that I could have been the one who led them right into that trap. Right then, a quiet chime came from one of the consoles. The communications officer spun around in her chair. "Sir, we have an incoming message. It's a human ship broadcasting from inside the exclusion zone." My heart started pounding against my ribs. On the screen, the memorial was replaced by the face of a human woman in a military uniform. She looked to be about my age. "This is Lieutenant Sarah Kim of the Earth Defense Force ship, the Sentinel. You are holding your position near the Earth Exclusion Zone demarcation line. Do you need any help?" Her voice was perfectly level and professional, without a trace of aggression. I took a deep breath to steady myself. "No help needed, Lieutenant. I'm Officer Krenal of the Zatharan corvette New Dawn. We're on a standard patrol." I hesitated for a second, then went with the truth. I had family on the ships that were destroyed 3 years ago. I just wanted to see the memorial. The professional look on Lieutenant Kim's face softened into one of real sympathy. "I see. I'm so sorry for your loss, Officer Krenal. Please, take as much time as you need. The memorial is for anyone who needs to remember." "Thank you," I replied, and then I asked the one question that had been eating away at me. "Lieutenant," I started, keeping my voice low, "did you know anyone who served on the Cassandra?" Kim gave a small, sad nod. "Captain Torres was my instructor at the academy. She taught me everything I know. She knew it was a one-way trip when she signed up for it. She had this wild hope that if our people saw humans willing to die just to send one last warning, it might be enough to convince Commander Velkoth to back down." I just stared out into the cold, black void. "But it wasn't enough," I said, the words feeling like shards of ice. "No," Kim whispered, and I could see the pain in her eyes. "It wasn't. Captain Torres knew the chances were basically zero, but she told us she had to try. That was just the kind of person she was." I thought about that for a moment. "So your people see her as a hero?" "Of course," Kim answered. "There's a statue of her at Earth's main orbital station. Her final transmission is required viewing for every new cadet. At the academy, they teach us that the best soldiers are the ones who never have to draw their weapons. They're diplomats first and fighters second. They praise Captain Torres as the ultimate hero who tried to stop a war. But as I stood there, looking at that memorial for the 500,000 souls we lost, the story just didn't add up. If you've ever had that feeling that the official story is leaving out the most important parts, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because you're about to hear the truth they tried to bury forever." I found my friend, Lieutenant Kim, in the ship's data archives. "Kim, can I ask you something seriously?" I whispered. "Totally off the record. Do you honestly believe what happened was the right thing to do?" Kim sighed, a sound that seemed to hold the echoes of all those lost souls. "That's a tough one, Krenal," she said, her gaze fixed on an old data screen. "It was a nightmare, a tragedy. But you've seen the history vids. You know what happens to species who can't throw a punch. They get wiped off the map. Earth chose to build a shield, not a coffin." But here's the thing she didn't know. My own great-grandmother was on one of those ships. And it wasn't a warship, it was carrying refugees. That was the first clue, the first crack in the official story. For weeks, I dove into classified archives and found another bombshell. Our defense grid fired a full 30 minutes before their fleet was even in attack range. This wasn't a defense, it was a trap. Then, hidden under layers of security, I found it. Captain Torres never gave the order. It came from a civilian administrator, a man who is now one of the most powerful figures in our government. Our people weren't invaders, they were running from his own twisted regime, and he used a fake alien threat to get rid of them and grab power. Torres was just the hero they needed for their cover story. We couldn't let him get away with it. Working together, Kim and I leaked the original, unaltered logs. The administrator was exposed, his entire career turned to ash. Captain Torres was finally recognized as a true patriot who had been betrayed. It was a quiet kind of justice, a happy ending written in the footnotes of history, and it taught us the most important lesson of all. The truth is always worth the fight. We made ourselves too much of a risk to attack, she went on, picking her words carefully, like she was walking through a minefield. What happened to your fleet? That was the awful, bloody price we paid to show our defenses were not a bluff. It was a terrible cost, but it has prevented hundreds of other wars from ever beginning. How many fights were avoided because other empires now think twice? How many trillions of lives have been saved because the bullies learned that a bigger army doesn't mean you automatically win? I had to ask, so the end justified the means? I think the means were monstrous, she shot back instantly, and I wish with every part of my soul there had been another way. But I also know that if we hadn't shown the galaxy we were deadly serious, someone else would have attacked, and then another. The exclusion net doesn't have a let's talk button. You can't reason with it. It's a machine, just doing what it was programmed to do. Your fleet had to learn that lesson in the most horrible way imaginable, making sure no one else ever would. The gravity of her words felt like a physical weight in the small cockpit. I appreciate your honesty, Lieutenant. We believe honesty is everything, she answered, especially with those who've paid so much for our security. Is there anything else you need? No, that's everything. Thank you. We'll be on our way soon. Kim gave a sharp nod. May your journey be a safe one, Officer Crenal, and again, I'm truly sorry for your loss. The screen went black. Crenal leaned back in his command chair, her words echoing in his mind. She seems decent, his second-in-command said quietly, for one of the species that broke our empire. She is, Crenal agreed, and that's what makes this so incredibly disturbing. It's one thing to be the new kid on the block, but it's a whole other level of terrible to be the galaxy's punching bag. And for a while, that was humanity. When we drew a line in the sand around our little corner of space, the older, bigger species thought it was a joke. They saw us as a free lunch. But one empire was about to learn a very hard lesson. When humanity gives a warning, it's not a suggestion. It's a promise. What would you do if the biggest bully in the universe came to kick in your front door? Stick around, because the answer to that question changed the rules for everyone. The message we sent out was simple: stay out. Just 2 words, broadcast on a loop on every frequency at the edge of our solar system, a permanent warning that this was our home. Across the galaxy, in the massive chambers of the Galactic Council, the major empires had a good laugh. Our ambassador, a brilliant woman named Chen, stood before them, asking for nothing more than the right to be left in peace. She explained that we weren't looking for trouble. We just wanted a little space to grow and figure ourselves out. But in a galaxy that operated on a survival of the fittest rule, asking for space sounded a lot like weakness. The ruling empires, who built their power by conquering others, only respected one thing: brute force. And they were sure we didn't have any. That's when the colossal Zithran Empire decided it was time to teach us a lesson. They sent their Grand Armada, the most feared fleet in this section of the galaxy. They weren't coming for a chat, they were coming to make an example out of the new guys. Back on Earth, we watched the news with our hearts hammering against our ribs. We were a species that had just barely figured out how to travel between planets. How could we possibly stand against them? We all knew that if we lost, we would lose everything. Ambassador Chen sent one final desperate warning, but the Zithran commander, his voice dripping with smug superiority, just laughed and cut the transmission. What the Zithrans didn't get was that our off-limits zone wasn't just a line on a star chart, it was a trigger. As their fleet sailed past that boundary, they weren't met with lasers or missiles. For a split second, there was only dead silence. The Zithran commander probably thought he had already won. And then it happened. The very space their fleet occupied just turned off. Every single ship and every last one of the 500,000 people on board was gone in an instant. There was no explosion, no wreckage, just nothing. This was our deepest, darkest secret. A defensive weapon so total, so terrifying, that we had hidden it away, praying we would never have to use it. We never wanted to be the monsters hiding in the dark, but they left us no choice. The punishment for crossing our line was complete and immediate erasure from existence. The galaxy went into a state of shocked silence. The laughing stopped, the condescension curdled into pure fear, and from that fear, a new, much more careful kind of respect began to take root. Suddenly, everybody wanted to talk. In the Galactic Council, a new law was rushed to the floor, supported by all the smaller species that had lived in fear of the larger empires for generations. The idea was stunningly simple. Every species has the right to its own sovereign territory. They insisted on naming it the Earth Accord in honor of the little species that proved a shield could be stronger than any sword. The funny thing is, Ambassador Chen herself argued against the name. "We don't want this to be about us," she told the council. "We just want to be one of many who have the basic right to be left alone." But the name stuck. The Earth Accord passed with a massive majority. The old guard, the predatory empires, were suddenly living in a totally new reality. They started talking about trade agreements instead of invasion strategies. They started sending diplomats instead of death squads. Our revenge wasn't just in winning that standoff without firing a single shot. It was in completely rewriting the rulebook for the entire galaxy. We proved that you didn't have to be the biggest or the meanest to have the right to exist. Conflict didn't just vanish overnight, but the age of casual cosmic bullying was over. Borders now meant something. Warnings were now taken seriously. Years later, Ambassador Chen gave her final speech before she retired. She looked out at the assembled delegates, many of whom had once laughed in her face. "I will not apologize for my government's actions," she said, her voice as solid as rock. "We did what was necessary to protect our home." Then, her expression softened just a tiny bit. "But we never wanted to be something to be feared," she admitted. "This is not the relationship we hope to build with the rest of the galaxy, but it is the one you forced upon us. It was only after we showed you the horrifying price for crossing our line that you finally decided we were worth listening to." She reminded them that respect that comes from fear is a fragile thing, easily shattered. Real respect, she explained, is built on a foundation of understanding and equality. "It is my greatest hope," she finished, "that future generations will see this moment not as a show of human power, but as the very last time anyone had to learn that some lines should never, ever be crossed." The entire council gave her a standing ovation, a show of respect that was almost unheard of in those chambers. She went back to a quiet life on Earth and never traveled to space again. She never even saw the monument we eventually put at the edge of our system, a simple beacon that just broadcast the words, "Stay out." But the story doesn't end there. In fact, the most shocking part was still to come. A decade later, the Zithran Federation, the very empire we had so completely humiliated, did something no one could have predicted. They built a second, massive monument right next to our own. Carved into its side were 500,000 names, the name of every single person who was lost on that fleet. And below that impossibly long list, a message was engraved for everyone to see. It read, "They were following orders. They believed in their empire. They were warned, but they refused to listen, and they paid the ultimate price. Let their sacrifice be a timeless lesson that arrogance is never a substitute for wisdom." The engraving went on. "May their memory remind us that every action has a consequence. Your strength does not give you the right to trample the rights of others." On the day of its dedication, starships from dozens of different species gathered at a respectful distance, not for war, but to bear witness. Not a single one of them dared to cross the line. Our new ambassador, David Martinez, sent out a simple message. "We are not here today to celebrate a victory or to mourn a defeat," he said. "We are here to mark a moment in time that changed our galaxy for the better, forever." And that is the real happy ending. It wasn't just that we saved our home. It's that our worst enemy learned from their catastrophic error and then helped teach that lesson to the rest of the universe. In her final writings, Chen put down a thought I will never forget. "People will argue for eternity about whether we did the right thing. I think they are asking the wrong question. We did exactly what we promised we would do. We drew a line in space, we told everyone not to cross it, and when someone finally did, we enforced that line. That is not an act of cruelty," she wrote. "It is an act of consistency. And in a galaxy where might makes right has always been the law of the land, sometimes consistency is the most powerful weapon you can have." In the end, Humanity didn't just carve out a place for itself among the stars. We taught the galaxy a lesson it was desperate to learn, that the right to simply be left alone is a right worth defending, and that true power isn't found in conquering others, but in having the courage to protect what is yours. We finally achieved what we had wanted all along. Not fear, not fame, but something far more basic and far more precious: peace. Every single name carved into this memorial, the president said, his voice thick with emotion, belongs to someone who died because a line was crossed. Their deaths were a profound tragedy, a preventable catastrophe that we will remember forever. But from their sacrifice, a legacy was born, a promise that this terrible lesson will never have to be learned again. He paused, his eyes scanning the silent crowd. On behalf of all of humanity, Earth offers its deepest sympathies to the Zithran Federation and to every family who lost someone they loved. We all hope for a future where strength isn't measured by weapons, he went on, a time when our actions are guided by mutual respect, not by fear. But we are not there yet. And until that day comes, the exclusion field remains active. That border is final. This warning is eternal. He then motioned towards the two immense monuments floating against the velvet black of space. "Let these two sentinels stand together as one," he proclaimed. "One was built by humans, the other by Zitharans. One serves as a memorial for the lost, the other serves as a warning for the proud. Together, they are a permanent testament to what happens when arrogance collides with an unyielding defense, and a symbol of our hope that someday we won't need such grim reminders." With those words, the ceremony concluded. The fleets of starships broke formation and vanished into warp, leaving the silent giants to stand guard over the invisible line where 300 warships had simply ceased to be. The decades rolled by. The galaxy continued its chaotic dance. New powers emerged while old empires faded into history. But the glowing boundary marking Earth's solar system never flickered. It became a permanent feature of the cosmos. Galactic trade routes were remapped to give it a wide berth, and old, grizzled starship captains would point it out to rookie pilots while telling them a very serious story. Imagine being told that a fleet larger than anything you have ever seen is on its way to your home, and their only goal is to wipe you off the map. That is the corner humanity was backed into. But what they did next wasn't just a surprise counterattack. It was an act that broke the laws of physics and sent a permanent chill down the spine of the entire galaxy. If you think you know stories about underdog victories, stick around, because you have never heard one like this. At Earth's military academies, cadets don't study the Zithran incident as a victory. They study it as a horror story. They learn how the exclusion net was built in secret, a weapon not of destruction, but of non-existence. They learn of its terrifying success and its soul-crushing cost. 500,000 lives vanished in a heartbeat, a galactic empire collapsing overnight, and a new reputation for humanity as the quiet species you never ever threaten. The final exam has one question. Knowing the outcome, would you have activated the net? Most cadets, focused on the 50 years of peace that followed, write yes. A few, believing a better way had to exist, write no. But the instructors are looking for the ones who truly grasp the nightmare of that choice, the students who write just 3 simple words: I do not know. All 3 answers get a perfect score. Decades later, a young historian finally tracked down one of the last surviving engineers from the project. The engineer was old and frail, living out her days in a quiet home far from the corridors of power. The historian approached the subject carefully. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked softly. "Creating something that absolute?" The old woman was silent for a full minute, her eyes lost in a memory 50 years old. "Every single day," she finally whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "And at the same time, not for a single second. It is always both." Seeing the historian's confusion, she explained, "We knew we were making a terrible gamble. It was a coin toss. On one side, we save our people. On the other, we lose our soul. We were desperate, so we flipped the coin, and we won the first bet. We bought our children safety. We bought them a future. But the price was our galaxy's trust. We became the monsters in the dark. We are feared, yes, but we are utterly and completely alone. But you would do it again? The historian pressed. The engineer's eyes met hers, clear and unwavering. Yes, because every other option was just a countdown to our extinction. We chose to be one terrifying lesson instead of 1,000 forgotten tragedies. The simulation said we made the right call, but a computer does not have to live with the ghosts of 500,000 names. That powerful interview was the heart of a book titled simply, The Warning. It became a bestseller on hundreds of worlds, a mandatory text for every diplomat and general. Its message was clear. The day the Zithran Armada vanished wasn't just a battle. It was the day the galaxy was violently forced to grow up. It revealed that the ultimate defense could be far more terrifying than any weapon of attack. But the book's final chapter wasn't about tactics. It was called The Price of Peace. It told the story of the scout ship Cassandra, whose crew flew a final desperate mission to deliver a warning they knew would be ignored. It remembered the Zithran soldiers, most of them just kids following orders, who flew confidently into nothingness. It spoke of the families on both sides who were left waiting forever, and the crushing weight carried by every person who had a hand in flipping that final switch. As the historian wrote in the closing pages, the question was never about our right to defend ourselves. The real question is what kind of universe we want to live in. One where we respect each other's space out of fear, or one where we do it out of a shared belief that we all deserve to exist. Humanity's desperate choice gave us the first. The old way of thinking, that the biggest bully with the biggest ships always wins, died that day. A new rule was written across the stars. Push someone far enough, and they might just invent a way to make attacking them an act of self-erasure. The galaxy is still a complicated place, filled with arguments and rivalries. But the fundamental rules of engagement were changed forever. And it all goes back to a single, unspoken message that hangs at the edge of human territory like an invisible wall. Stay out. 2 words that taught the entire galaxy a lesson it has never dared to forget. On Earth, hidden in a quiet memorial garden, a single monument of polished black stone tells the human side of the story. It is covered not with the names of soldiers, but with the names of the scientists, the engineers, the programmers, and the leaders who made the impossible choice. Beneath the thousands of names, a single line is carved into the stone. We did what we had to. Let history be our judge and pray for a day when such choices are no longer necessary. Today, countless ships travel between the stars in an era of unprecedented peace. And every single one of them carefully plots a course that leaves a wide, respectful berth around a quiet, empty patch of space where 300 warships once confidently charged ahead and were simply deleted from the universe. The warning holds. The border is absolute. The galaxy finally learned to listen.